Good afternoon, dear audience. I'm very happy to introduce my today's guest, Mr. Charpentier, the prominent US novelist and expert on political affairs. Good afternoon, Mr. Charpentier.
Good afternoon, Mr. Kartsian. Thank you for having me again.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm also happy to hear you again. So, Mr. Charpentier, we now have many interesting, very important news. Today, President of France, Mr. Macron, he announced that in case Russia will try to invade Kiev or Odessa, France is going to send military troops to Ukraine. So it will be a red line for France. In case Russia crosses this line, then France can send military troops to Ukraine. Obviously, this is not the first time we hear such ambitious statements from the President Macron. So how can you interpret it? And can we trust such statement?
Well, at the beginning, as you know, my position was that I didn't think that the West should send troops on Ukrainian soil, but that's only because I thought that the Ukrainians would be able to handle it on their own, and I still believe that Ukraine can be victorious. But I think that we've reached a different point in the war. So I think that we do need, the West does need to draw lines now. However, Macron must follow through with what he says, though. So I just hope that this isn't tough talk. And what other countries would be behind France if Macron was to follow through on what he said, that that would be that Odessa and the capital would be the red line.
Mr. Charpentier, I follow very carefully these days news from the United States, which come from the United States, and obviously here in Ukraine we usually follow what is called mainstream medias from the United States, like Wall Street Journal, like New York Times, Washington Post, and these are mainstream medias, and unfortunately, they don't cover the whole spectrum of political views which exist in the United States. For instance, what I realized that there are so many right now YouTube channels in the United States which pursue a conservative agenda. And from my personal opinion, I think that some of them are financed by Russia, because what they do, they simply twist facts and they try to push Russia propaganda in the United States. So they try to persuade American people that there is no reason to help Ukraine. So they do not provide, let's say, the whole range of opinions regarding what is happening in Ukraine. They present selective range of facts, trying to state that the Ukrainian army is going to crumble, everything is going to bad, we don't need to help Ukraine, etc., etc. So I consider it as a Russian propaganda. But at the same time, obviously, I'm very surprised that such eminent people like Professor Meschmeyer, for instance, who is quite a prominent figure in the Republican conservative field, he argued that it is not in the interests of the United States to help Ukraine and to worsen the relationship with Russia due to the fact that the main foe for the United States is China, so the United States had to keep good relations with Russia. And I'm very surprised because we see here kind of geopolitical calculations which actually replace international law. And I'm very surprised because Ukraine is appeal to democracy, and you support Ukrainian appeal towards democracy. Ukraine is appeal for international law, which Russia actually violated. And now we hear that some people in the United States on a Republican line or conservative line, they're talking about geopolitics, not about international law. So how can you interpret this? Why geopolitics replaces international law?
Well, I think going back to what you were talking about, let's talk about the sources first, the online sources first. Yeah, well, I mean, personally, I always read and only listen to reliable sources. Sometimes I'll listen to certain sources that aren't major news networks, but I'll make sure that I'm listening to a professor, maybe a Stanford. If I want to listen to other things, I make sure it's a PhD at Stanford or MIT. And so I always pay attention that it's a historian. I always pay attention to the sources, not just some person who started a YouTube channel and is talking about, geopolitics and doesn't know anything about international relations or international law. So sources are always very important. I think even more so today, because anyone can have access anyone can start their own YouTube channel or just any kind of online media and also Russia is now taking advantage of this. So we need it. So it's even more. We have to be even more concerned about our sources, on our online sources. And yes, I thought you would talk about that particular Republican. I mean, I think that even educated or people that are supposed to be educated because they're voted in by the people, that you would think that they would be more. I wonder where they get their sources sometimes, because his sources aren't, as you said, in line with international relations or international law.
Mr. Charpentier, while you were answering my question, I looked to Wikipedia to research about Professor Meschmeyer. So what I found out that he is Wendell Harrison Distinguished Service Professor at the University of Chicago, and he published several books, which actually is possible to find on Amazon, and he is best known for developing the theory of offensive realism, which describes the interaction between great powers as being primarily driven by the rational desire to achieve regional hegemony in an anarchic international system. So, obviously, he's quite known professor because he used to be on Lex Friedman show and on Tucker Carlson's show and some other shows on the mainstream media as well. So I can't say that, majority Americans support his point of view, but still, his point of view reflects some moods inside the United States. And actually, this is very dangerous because for Ukraine, which fight against Russian invaders, against Russian dictatorship, Putin, etc. It's very important to secure the support from the United States. And actually, President Biden called Speaker Johnson to help to adopt this bill in order to finance Ukrainian army and keep Ukrainian army in good fitness. But we see that, everything stopped due to U.S. elections. So my question will be the following. So we see the polls actually, so now we have two candidates who's going to run in this election. So it will be Mr. Biden, President Biden, and Mr. Trump, the former president. So and obviously the voters in the United States, they let's say they define an agenda of the future president or next president or incumbent president. So do you think that this type of opinions, like I just gave to you, which is proclaimed by Marsh Meyer, some other folks, will define the agenda of the future US president, regardless his name?
No, I don't think so. There are always outliers, even with intellectuals and professors. And look, it doesn't always. Sometimes you have some very smart and highly educated people who just take a very different intellectual path, and they just have very different views from the mainstream. Even though he's on mainstream networks, he's not a mainstream. He's not a well-known academic in the academic, in academia. So, because I know very little about him. So, you can always find people like him, and believe me, people like Tucker Carlson or other Republicans will always be able to find highly qualified, highly intellectuals or PhDs, because again, and I don't necessarily take an all-out realist approach, but I also don't think that realism is altogether not useful in some instances. I think that I think there needs to be a balance, right? But I think his particular approach to realism is too dangerous, and I think that it can, with the way things are going in the Republican Party these days, it's sort of going a little bit a lot with the Ukrainian aid. But I mean, I think even a lot of Republicans are starting to reconsider their position, and that's not a good sign. I think the one good thing about the political climate, I won't put a time frame on it because I'm not sure when exactly it started to change. I mean, you might know. But I mean, the one good thing is that at the beginning of the war, the Republicans and Democrats were firmly united, which was very surprising. I mean, even I was very surprised, and I think that Putin was betting on disunity. But at this stage, it doesn't look good, and I think Trump is using a lot of this, because it's a presidential year, right? I mean, presidential season is close at hand, so I think, and it shouldn't be a political issue. It should just be a humanitarian issue. It should be an issue that's dealt with not politically.
Okay, General Wesley Clark, you probably know him. He's a retired general who served as a supreme commander for United States troops in Europe. So General Clark, he's actually belongs to, let's say, Democratic Party, and he even tried to run through the presidential elections. He gave an interview, and where he suggested that United States misunderstood Russia from the beginning of millennium, and actually this misunderstanding was caused by all administrations, Republican, Democratic, etc. So Bush administration, Obama administration, etc. And actually, Obama administration should support Ukraine in protecting Crimea Peninsula back in 2014, because obviously for Russia it was very easy to annex Crimean Peninsula because United States, as he suggests and other experts suggest, United States asked Ukraine not to try to military protect Peninsula Crimea again. Bearing in mind the consequences of this step. And obviously Russia annexed a peninsula, and this was a Pandora box. So after it, this war started. And actually, General Clark says that United States had to provide the whole military assistance to Ukraine during these years. So during Obama years, during Trump years, and during Biden years before the Russian invasion. So in case Ukraine received all ammunition, all weaponry Ukraine needs, then Russia obviously would think twice before invade Ukraine. So do support this idea that United States, regardless of, let's say, administration, which was in the command of United States, made a mistake by not providing enough support for Ukraine before the war, which could make this war impossible.
Yeah, I think we definitely mishandled Crimean invasion, and I think we should have done a lot more than we did. I think that Obama just miscalculated. I guess this administration didn't see the severity. I mean, I don't understand how they could miss that one, but I mean, yeah, we obviously should have acted a lot sooner. I mean, Obama is a president that dropped a lot more bombs than a lot of other presidents during his presidency, and yet he really didn't do enough. But I think part of that might be, and I'm not trying to make any excuses for Obama, because he does, I mean, I'm generally, think he was generally a good president, but I think this is one of his really big blunders. He should have obviously done a lot more. Yeah, I really, I'm not, I didn't follow Crimea the way that I did, the way that I do, with the full-scale war. So I can't really, give you too much of a comment on that. But I haven't really done any research on that. But he definitely should have done a lot more.
Before our interview, I was reading some notes which were left by Friedrich the Great, one of the prominent German ruler.
I think that, I don't mean to cut you short, but I think that in general, especially before the Crimean War, I don't think that the United States saw Russia as too much of a threat, and I think that was even before the invasion of Crimea. I think that was the biggest miscalculation on America's part.
Before our interview, I was reading notes prepared by Friedrich the Great, one of the prominent German ruler back in the 17th century, where he argued, actually it was his thoughts which he left for his successors, that he argued that the ruler has to be not a servant for people, but the servant for the state, for the interest of state. And obviously we understand that in some point the interest of state and the interests of folks contradicts to each other. It's not a popular point of view, and obviously this is actually what happened to Western world in the 20th century when, people receive the voting rights. So people started to believe that there is a democracy, so people can appoint and fire politicians, top politicians, etc., etc. So they think that they have an influence over the daily politics, and they can express their own will. So, and actually, we see that in the 20th century, the decline of Western world started. Even before the Second World War, Oswald Spengler published a book, The Decline of Europe, where he suggested why Europe is declining. One of the reasons was, let's say, popular vote, voting rights, which were spread across Europe. So do you agree that in some point, if we're talking about, let's say, this precise case about Russian invasion into Ukraine, so we see that Western leaders were reluctant to send troops to Ukraine because they understand if they send troops to Ukraine, then their locals, their folks, they won't understand why their sons and daughters have to die to protect, another country. It is very difficult to explain, even the country which is not in NATO. But at the same time, we know that Ukraine is fighting for the democratic values, fighting for human rights, etc., etc. So, and here is a contradiction. So, Western leaders, because they bear in mind the future elections, they can't send troops because they depend upon their voters, the folks who do not understand the situation from the state perspective. They see the situation only from their own perspective. So my question will be the following: is it possible to actually defy dictatorship if the Western leaders, who is treated to be democratic leaders, have always rely on popular vote, on people, and they can't exercise the power in the flexible and the most efficient way which is needed in order to fight dictatorships?
Well, I think that, first of all, it's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think that a leader always needs to consider the state, its institutions, its laws, its political system as a system, and consider the people in democracies. But no, sometimes leaders, even Bill Clinton said, I forget where he said it, it might have been an interview or something, but even he said, and obviously he's a Democrat, but I mean, and this might even sound kind of like a Republican kind of stance. He said sometimes even, the people don't understand certain situations because they lack, the knowledge, or just they don't have the information that a politician, and I'm adding some of this to what he said, but and so sometimes a leader just has to make the right decision, even if the people, and I for sure he didn't mean this for everything, but there are certain times where a leader has to make a decision for his people. And, leaders make, both Republican and Democratic leaders make decisions all the time without the people's consent. I mean, if they were it would be impossible, right, to run a country, always considering the people. They do have the people's consent to rule, and well, that's enough. And they should generally run the country according to a lot of the things that they talked about before they were elected, and enact a lot of those policies. But sometimes things change, situations change, and And sometimes, I think that's what being a leader, whether you're a Republican or Democrat, that's what being a good leader is about being a good, strong, and it doesn't matter whether you're a politician or if you're running a company or, I'm speaking as a leader in general, right? Sometimes a leader just has to make wise decisions on his own. And,
Mr. Charpentier, I would like to finish our today's interview with Edmund Burke, the famous English philosopher, English-Irish philosopher. Edmund Burke used to say that what is bad in a nutshell can eventually bear the positive outcome. And what is good in a nutshell can in fact bring a catastrophic outcome. So we never know how the things are going to turn out. So because this is life. We understand now that Ukraine is a very difficult position geopolitically, because Ukraine fights with a big country, which have more population, more facilities. Actually, this country has enough money to produce enough military equipment and to make their ends meet, while Ukraine has to rely on Western support. So it's a difficult situation for Ukraine. But even though it is difficult, if you, let's say, follow this Mr. Burke's view, at the end of the day, something positive can pump up. Yeah. So do you, or how do you foresee Ukraine after this war? Obviously, we all think about the victory for Ukraine, that Ukraine is eventually going to restore its full independence and territorial integrity. Obviously, we believe in this, but it's rather early to talk about this, because now the war is going on. But if we are talking about generally about the vision of Ukraine, about the vision of Ukraine. So as a novelist, as an expert, how you envisage Ukraine in 10, 20 years, in 30 years, bearing in mind this experience which Ukraine gained during the last 30 years of its independence, including wars with Russia?
Well, first of all, war is one of the most unpredictable phenomena there is. And even a lot of generals say this. So things could, anything can happen during a war. And there are wars, and I won't go into history right now, but I mean, sometimes wars can, sometimes things happen, and sometimes a country that really seems like it's when it's at war, that there's no chance of victory. I mean, sometimes things work in their favor. I think if Ukraine doesn't win a total victory, I think that there's still a good chance that Ukraine could still possibly have a good future, even if it doesn't gain all of its territories. I think that if Russia completely, annexes all of Ukraine, then I think that the last 30 years of Ukrainian independence, I wouldn't say that it would be a complete loss, because I think that Ukrainians have learned a lot and have really come a very long way. People always focus on a lot of the negative things about Ukraine those 30 years, specifically focus on the corruption. But I think that Ukraine took a very different path from Russia, right? Wanting democracy, wanting a lot of things that the Russian people really just didn't aspire to, and also the Russian government didn't even go on a more and I don't want to even get into a democratic. Well, yeah, I'll say it. I mean, well, Ukraine early on wanted to go. I wouldn't say early on, but was going in that direction. And aside from that, I think that I've never lived in Russia, so I can't really say a lot about Russia, but I lived in Ukraine, as you know. And although the Eastern European culture is quite different, I just always felt that Ukrainians were really yearning for something more than from where they came from and from what they had. And they wanted to go in a different direction, and I could just with their country than their past and a different direction, the direction away from Russia. And I think that there was a certain mindset to all of that, obviously, that was very different from the Russian mindset. And I think this is one of the reasons that. I mean, there are a lot of reasons, obviously. I won't get into all those reasons, but this is another reason that Putin decided to invade Ukraine. This scared him, and he knew that Ukrainians were just going in a direction that if he didn't act militarily, because he couldn't brainwash the Ukrainian people like he tried to do, like he did with his own people, or like he's even trying to do with a lot of the misinformation that we were talking about earlier, that's even affecting a lot of American politicians these days, right? And some very highly intelligent people, I might add, these days.
Mr. Charpentier. Mr. Charpentier, while you were answering my question, I actually received a notification from several medias that President Maya Sandu, the president of Moldova, the neighboring country to Ukraine, while being in Romania, in Bucharest now, there is a great meeting of European People's Party. So basically, European People's Party is a party, European Union party, but which unites, let's say, under association agreement, different conservative parties around Europe. So President Sandu, like former president of Ukraine, Poroshenko, like Prime Minister Donald Tusk of Poland, etc., they are now in Bucharest. And President Sandu made a statement that Russia is trying to stage a coup in Chisinau. So basically, Russia is trying to overthrow the democratically elected government. So Russia is going to influence presidential elections and parliamentary elections in Poland, in Moldova in upcoming months. So obviously, this statement from one side can be received as a part of the, let's say, political games inside Moldova before elections. But from another perspective, bearing in mind Ukrainian experience, we know that Russia potentially can stage a coup in Moldova, bearing in mind that there are many Moldovan people with a strong Russian sympathy, and there is a Transnistria region which is occupied by Russia during the last 30 years. So actually, Russia has power and resources to influence the situation in Moldova, even though Russia does not have a common border with Moldova like Russia has with Ukraine. So do you see here threats for, let's say, increasing instability in Europe?
Well, I think that Putin's trying to cause instability around the globe. I don't think he's trying to do this just with neighboring countries that Russia borders with, or countries that Russia doesn't border with, or even countries on the other side of the world. I think the more chaos he wreaks around the more chaos that he starts around the world, the more difficult it is for the West to focus on the Ukrainian war, right? Even with what's going on in the Middle East and even Africa. He's even trying to stir things up in Africa. So, I think that he's trying to cause instability around the world, and this is extremely dangerous. And I think that his propaganda system is extremely sophisticated. And I think it's a lot more sophisticated than people give it credit. I mean, than people can imagine. And I don't think that Putin is really the kind of man that leader that sits down, or that his party is the kind. I mean, that his regime is the kind of regime that really sits down and plans everything out the way the Chinese government does. I think the Chinese government plan, and I'm not comparing China to Russia. I'm just saying that I'm just comparing two big countries that are very influential around the world, like America. Because again, I want to stress that I see China as a challenge, but not an enemy. Russia is an enemy. So let me just clarify that. But with China, we have a country that is much more. China knows what they're doing in the next 5 years. They know what they're doing in the next 20 years.
So you think Russia acts spontaneously? I mean, Russians, yes, they act spontaneously.
I think so, but I still wouldn't underestimate
the level of threat.
The level of the threat. I think that in some ways, it can be even it's more unpredictable. I think with China too, you can't really predict China, because China does things in a very secretive way, in a very in a very different way than the West and even Russia. With Russia and America, you can always we usually the leaders like to show they have strength. But for a country like China, for instance, China is a lot more powerful than the world thinks they are. For instance, a country like China will always act like it's a lot more powerful than it is.
So you think that President Xi of China, he is more predictable than Mr. Putin?
Well, yes and no, because I don't think that China is impulsive. But I think that China is more difficult to penetrate, to try to really understand, because of the way that they protect the way their system works. I think even a lot of experts, experts on Chinese affairs, only know so much, and they can only know so much. I mean,
Mr. Charpentier, thank you very much for this interview. I would like to repeat again that Mr. Aaron Charpentier is a U.S. novelist and expert on international affairs. mostly on Western Ukrainian affairs. And also, I forgot to mention at the beginning, he is also the member of Pan-Europa Union, established 100 years ago by Count Kudenhov-Kalergi to support the idea of United Europe. Actually, we interviewed Mr. Kluchik, Secretary General of Austrian Division, recently. So it's a second person from Pan-Europe which we have on our show. So thank you very much, Mr. Charpentier, and have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thanks again for having me.